Mr. Chair, the meeting is live.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tony Mancini, the Chair of the Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee. Welcome. It's February the 4th, and it's a few minutes after 1 o'clock, and we're looking forward to today's meeting. So I call this meeting to order. First order of business is to do a bit of a roll call, and make sure we can check everyone's sound and visual. So from lovely District 5, Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think all is well and working here.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cleary from District 9.
Hello, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, Councillor.
That's awesome. Well, welcome everyone watching, and glad to be here from District 9, Halifax West Armdale.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Morris from District 10.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to be here from Fairview, Clayton Park, and Rockingham.
Thank you, Councillor. And last but not least, of course, the Councillor Lovelace. Councillor from District 13.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Coming to you live from beautiful Hammonds Plain, St. Margaret's.
And indeed, it is beautiful. And unfortunately, Councillor Dago Gammon can't be with us today from District 1. She sends her regrets. So the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the December 7th, 2020 meeting. Who would like to put that forward?
Councillor Cleary would move.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. Do you have a seconder?
Seconder.
And sorry, who was that?
Councillor Morse.
Kathy Morse. Thank you. And all those in favor of approving those minutes, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? We now have approved minutes. Next is number 3, approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's nothing from the clerk's office.
And if the committee allows, I would ask that the information report number 2 on hydrogen and decarbonizing Halifax, that information report will be brought forward to the next meeting for discussion.
Sounds good.
So can we have someone move the order of business?
I so move. Councillor Lovelace.
Thank you, Councillor Lovelace. A seconder?
Second, Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yep. And we have an approved agenda. Business arising out of the minutes. Seeing none, call for declaration of conflict of interest. No one here has major shares in the oil business, I guess not, so we'll keep moving. Motions of reconsideration, motion of rescission, and consideration deferred business, and notice of table matters, all none. Now it comes to number 10, correspondence, petitions, and delegations. Madam Clerk, are there any correspondence?
Mr. Chair, there is no correspondence received for this meeting.
Thank you. Are there any petitions? See no petitions, and it comes time for presentations. We actually have 3 presentations, 2 from the general public and 1 from staff, so looking forward to these presentations. The first one is the welcome lot, how parking lots can contribute to Halifax low carbon pathway. And I believe Michael is on the line, and I invite Michael to unmute yourself by pressing *6. And then Michael, are you with us? Michael, if you there. Michael, that's you. We're having a hard time hearing you. So Michael, try that again, *6. So, yeah, we're not hearing you very well, Michael. If that, in fact, is you speaking, I don't know, Madam Clerk, if someone can reach out to him.
Sure, I can do that. If committee members can also start with 10.3.2, and I can contact Michael to help him join the meeting.
Let's do that, Madam Clerk. If we could maybe see the folks from Sandy Lake could do their presentation, move it up. And if you could put the Sandy Lake presentation up on the screen for them. And so we have Sandy Lake, Sackville River Regional Park presentation by Karen McKendry and Karen Robinson. And so if you're waiting for the Sandy Lake presentation to go, so you're flipping through that, or flipping through the parking one, and we'll bring up the Sandy Lake. In the meantime, there we go. We invite Karen to present. If you could unmute by pressing *6, and then you can let us know. Oh, I've got a Karen. Which Karen do I have?
I'm Karen McKendry. Is the presentation queued up on slide 1?
It is. And Karen Robinson, are you there also?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear, and welcome. And before we start, is there to join your committee and your group, did you have to be named Karen? Is that a rule?
Pardon me?
To join your group, do you have to be named Karen, or is that a rule? Or everybody?
There are a lot of Karens working and volunteering in conservation in Nova Scotia.
Well, you know,
aside there.
That's great to have your name associated with such good things. So that's wonderful. Well, look, welcome to both Karens. We look forward to your presentation on Sandy Lake. You have 10 minutes, and when there's about 1 minute left, the clerk will give you that heads up if you need to. So thank you and welcome to the committee, and the floor is to both of you.
Okay, well, thank you for the warm welcome, and thank you for being open to hearing from us today. So as you'll see on our first slide, so my name is Karen McKendry. You can see a picture of me in butterfly form in the bottom left there, and you'll also hear later from Karen Robinson. What we'd like to do today is share with you a little bit of a background on our coalition and the regional park that we're working on, but then really move on to letting you know about the next steps in safeguarding and growing the park and the potential role that this committee could play in doing so. So please move to slide 2. So first I wanted to share with you a map from a planning document from 1971. So this is the first park planning exercise that was undertaken by what was then the Halifax-Dartmouth metropolitan area. So it took into account both a planning perspective and actually sought expertise from the Canadian Wildlife Service about natural assets. So the report and maps identified the best places for large parks that could support both recreation and the conservation of natural assets. Many of the parks that we know and love today were actually ideas at this time in 1971. So places like Long Lake Provincial Park, Hemlock Ravine, First Lake, McNabb's Island, they're all identified in this report. This is the first time that Sandy Lake and Sackville River are identified as priority places for a large city park, and that is circled in red on this image. So since that time, the county, the town of Bedford, and then HRM have all acquired land that contributed to the park that we have at Sandy Lake today. And it's gone by different names over the years: Sackville River Regional Park, Sandy Lake Park, Jack Lake Regional Park, but it's all the same place. And actually going forward, we recommend that it be called Sandy Lake Sackville River Regional Park. And what we have at the park is incredible. Slide 3, please. So this is a park with public access, including 2 parking lots, gravel trails, a swimming beach complete with change rooms and HRM lifeguards in the summer. For those who know about the park, it's a hidden gem. The swimming in Sandy Lake is glorious. The trails through old growth forests are awe-inspiring, and it's a great place for dogs to run free in the official off-leash area. People also hike, trail run, bird watch, canoe, and ski and snowshoe in the winter in the park. So it's well used for those who know about it. And HRM has invested in the infrastructure of the park, as has the community group Bedford Lions Club. So this park has many established wonderful features, but it also is still a work in progress. Slide 4, please. So on this map, we can show you the park as it stands now and the area that we'd like to see it expanded into. So currently the park stands at about 1,000 acres, and that's all owned by HRM. And this is shown in the large purple blob on the map, most of it east of Sandy Lake, which is also labeled. The park is surrounded on 3 sides by land that is still mostly wild, and that's shown in dark green. This wild area is made up mostly of Acadian forest stands of all ages, from clear cuts up to old growth forest aged more than 125 years old. It also contains several brooks, including the headwaters of Sandy Lake on the west side of the lake. So the full extent of what's still wild is shown here, outlined in a red line. So far, our group has been calling for all of this land to be added to the park. So that would be 1,800 additional acres. Much of this land is still in excellent natural condition and is owned either privately, by the federal government, or by the provincial government. Since the area was first proposed in 1971, we've learned a lot about the area. Next slide, please. Slide 5. So multiple studies over the years have documented the natural features of the area inside and outside of the existing park and made recommendations to grow the park. A huge amount of the scientific study of the area has been done by retired Dalhousie professor Dr. David Patriquin, and he shared all his findings on a website that he hosts. In addition to his work documenting species and ecosystems and water quality, another biologist recently completed a report that documents 15 federally or provincially listed species at risk in the area and more than 99 bird species using the park. There's also a report about to come out that defines in more detail than the Halifax Green Network Plan did where the wildlife corridors are in this area. So all of this to say that the area is exceptionally biodiverse and it's key for wildlife movement on and off of the Halifax Peninsula. The reasons for protecting this site are outstanding and they're on par with the work that groups like the Nature Trust and the Nature Conservancy strive to do on sites around the province. In fact, I used to work for the Nature Trust as a conservation biologist, and I traveled all over Nova Scotia to look at properties and document their rare species and ecosystems and evaluate if they were worthy of protection. And this place is more outstanding than many of the places I visited across Nova Scotia. Next slide, please. Another aspect worth considering here is the ecosystem services provided by Sandy Lake and its headwaters and the forests that surround the lake. So Sandy Lake, unlike most of the lakes on the Halifax Peninsula, is a deep blue lake enriched by the drumlins that surround it. That's one of the sources of its water chemistry. So Sandy Lake is naturally an oligotrophic lake. So looking at this diagram, on the left, we get a reminder of what oligotrophic means for lakes, that they're relatively low in nutrients like phosphorus, and these lakes tend to be deep, cold, clear, and they have good water quality. Mesotrophic lakes have more plant growth, more algae growth, and are starting to lose their ability to mix, which many lakes do twice a year. And then finally, too much phosphorus or nitrogen leads to eutrophication, a state in which lakes have excessive plant and algal growth. They can become toxic to fish species, and they can become unsafe for swimming and drinking water. Unfortunately, many of you would be familiar with some of the lakes in HRM that are now at this stage. Slide 7, please. But wonderfully, Sandy Lake is naturally an oligotrophic lake. Water quality testing of the lake started in the 1970s and continues today. So this chart shows that the lake is slowly moving to mesotrophic, but it is possible to stop this progression and reverse it if we don't make the situation worse and then we address the nutrient inputs to the lake. We have a chance to save this lake, and it has the characteristics to be sustained as a healthy lake. The vital thing to do now is to take action before the situation worsens. Slide 8, please. What happens to Sandy Lake has profound effects on Sackville River. The Sackville River is the largest river that empties into Halifax Harbor, and it's also famous for the restoration work completed on the river by the Sackville Rivers Association led by Walter Regan, another one of our steering committee members. Thousands of dollars and thousands of volunteer hours have gone into physical restoration of the habitat features that are needed by Atlantic salmon in the river. One of the headwaters of the Sackville River is Sandy Lake, and so what happens in the lake flows right downstream into the river. And vice versa. In the summer of 2019, someone spotted a mature Atlantic salmon jumping right out of the water in Sandy Lake. So this endangered species would have swum up from the ocean, up Sackville River, up through Marsh Lake, up through Pepperell's Brook, and into Sandy Lake, where it could still find cold, oxygenated water in the summer. So this is a conservation success, But to maintain these headwaters that the salmon sought out and the water quality in Sackville River, we have to maintain Sandy Lake if we want the salmon to keep coming back to this river and lake system. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Karen Robinson to continue. Please move to slide 9.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you everyone for hearing us today. Karen and I represent the coalition of 28 regional, provincial, and local groups, each with an interest in preserving this special area. But this park's future is at a crossroads. The last regional plan states this regional park is to be expanded, yet in a different section of the same plan, it's named as a growth center. The park has had 5 decades of contributions by community and government's investment, and in 2015, the city acquired yet another 160 acres, and thank you to those of you who were involved in that. This was significant because it was an acquisition from developers of watershed lands west of Marsh Lake, and they were chosen specifically to protect their ecological value to the park. And while this map that you're seeing in slide 10 please, was not intended to provide a final boundary for the park, it was rather to facilitate acquiring the 160 acres. The text of that document contained the rationale for the city to acquire more of the important watershed west and northwest of the lakes.
1 minute.
Now, the developers, thank you, who own another 500 acres west of Sandy Lake, have applied to develop. Cities, of course, need places to put homes, but we also need other elements to live well. Complete communities need valued natural areas like this one, which was identified by biologists in 1971. And there were no biological studies done when the lands were arbitrarily zoned from park to housing, nor when in 2006 the regional plan put them next in line for development. Our coalition estimates we need to protect another 1,800 acres. However, we believe it's extremely important that we all see what an independent biology-based boundary study would determine. The regional plan review is underway, and we ask that HRM commission this independent scientific boundary study, including issues such as wildlife corridors that are relevant to the Halifax Green Network Plan. It would inform and not bind the work and the decisions of staff and council. We hope that you will request this independent report today through a motion. Thank you very much on behalf of Karen and the coalition.
Well, thank you very much to both of you. And as Councillor Austin put in our chat group, and I referred to the two Karens, he says putting the care in Karen. So very good, Councillor Austin. And, well, thank you very much for that presentation. And do any committee members have questions for Karen or Karen?
I do, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Austin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the presenters for coming. Not a section of the municipality I know very well, but you've intrigued me. I was making a mental note. I'll have to get my 2 daughters this summer over there to explore. Just one question on the water quality piece that you referenced and the long data period that actually exists for this lake. Has there ever been any examination of like where those sources of nutrients are coming from? Is it from that one side of the lake where there's development? I'm not aware of exactly what the water flow direction is there. I'm just wondering what the inflow of nutrients, where that's coming from, if that's ever been really looked at. Thank you.
Karen, did you want to speak to that, or would you like me to speak to that?
I can speak briefly to it, but I'm sure that you would have things to add. Dr. Patrickman has been doing recent studies, and they've been trying to answer that exact question, and they're finding some of the tributaries have more nutrients than others, and we haven't really determined yet what exactly it is about those particular ones that are causing the higher levels, but we have some suspicions. We do know that the Uplands Park sewer system isn't helping, and that there are some industrial areas along one of the major tributaries, especially to the west. And Karen, do you have more to add?
Yeah, I would just say it's an ongoing question, and there is community-based monitoring, regular monitoring that's adding to the data set at a fine scale, so up individual tributaries. So I'm encouraged by this place because it is possible to track where is the nutrient input and what could we do about it. I mean, and another piece of evidence is that in 2013, there was a clear cut on the west side of the lake. It's about 300 acres, and it all happened within 1 year. And the ongoing monitoring saw an increase in nutrient input, which is now maybe healing and getting a little bit better. So to me, that's direct evidence of a concept of if you clear forest right next to the edge of a lake, then you're going to have a flush of nutrients come in, which, you know, healthy lakes can withstand a little bit. But what we don't want to see is a repeat of that. If there's clearing of the forest right down close to the lake again, then we can't anticipate yet again too much nutrients coming into the lake.
I remember that clear cut being in the news. It's, if memory serves, it was more of a spike cut than anything else. So it would, I'm just looking at the map here. So the area of concern would be that main tributary coming in near the farmer's dairy there, from that flows all the way out towards the Hammonds Plains Road area.
Yeah, I mean, a great site to go to is Dr. David Patrick's site that he created all about this work, where he has detailed mapping of his sampling locations and all of the headwaters. So briefly, there's sort of one stream that's one of the headwaters, and it has sort of 3 forks that empty into it called Johnson's Brook. So you can look in Google Earth or through his site to see what the sampling on each of those has been and what kind of areas they flow through, and maybe start to anticipate some of the challenges to those. I do think it's a site where you could work with stakeholders and landowners to restore some of the natural features there that act as buffers against increased eutrophication. So again, it's a site where I think some of the headwaters are developed already. We don't want to develop more of them. And the ones that have been impacted, I think there's potential to work there, especially with some of the new federal money coming online to work on habitat restoration.
Okay. Councillor Austin, do you want to come back if you have a question?
No, that wraps it up. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor, let's see, who's next? Councillor Lovelace, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much, Karen times 2, for this presentation. Karen squared, I guess. I really appreciate the work that you've put into connecting with partners in the community, raising awareness throughout Hammonds Plains of Sandy Lake. Certainly, there's a number of people, are new to the area and didn't know that this beautiful beach was there and this beautiful trails and so on. So thank you so much for spreading the word on that. I am aware of ongoing issues along Hammonds Plains Road with regards to stormwater management problems overall, and the need for Halifax Water to address that. So I just wanted to make sure that, I just kind of raise the issue as to whether or not you've had those conversations with them. In recognition of the clear cut that did take place, certainly, it's clear that there are significant issues when it comes to clear cutting around these protective areas. And so my question to you is, have you had those conversations with Halifax Water? Another question I have for you is, how much water do we know is Farmers Dairy taking from the lake, if anything at all? The other thing I just wanted to comment on was the back to Halifax Water, was the Uplands Park sewer system. And you had kind of casually mentioned, Karen, that this could be contributing. So I just wanted a confirmation as to if that is an actual fact, or is it a known belief that Uplands Park sewage system is causing issues throughout this area, because it's something that I would like to bring forward to Halifax Water and have that addressed. Thank you.
Shall I start, Karen? Karen M. This is Karen. Karen R. Yes. First about Farmers Dairy, they're not taking any water from the lake. There was a point in time when they first moved here where the intention was that they would do that, take water and also dump refuse into the lake. But that was all taken care of a couple of decades ago, 3 decades ago, and and they are members of our coalition. Farmers Dairy is, and they're wonderful members. And also Uplands Park Community Group is a member of our coalition, and again, wonderful members. And yes, we've attended meetings with Halifax Water, and I have attended meetings with Halifax Water and the Uplands Park Group. And I know that Halifax Water is taking action to improve things, so that's very good.
Councillor Lovelace, you're good?
I just have one more quick question, and that's whether or not we have any information from DND as to the use or potential release of their large land lot at the north end of Sandy Lake.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So one of the 1,800 acres that we think would support the park that's still in a wild state, 600 of that's one of the largest sections belongs to Department of National Defense, and a small portion of it is what people would recognize as the Bedford Rifle Range, which you can see from Highway 102. But that only takes up, a couple dozen acres. The remaining 600 acres is wild and is off limits to the public, and it has species at risk on it, like wood turtle. It has the Sackville River that flows through it. So it has a number of nature conservation characteristics. And there's now a new federal tool for a new type of protected area called OECMs, Other Effective Conservation Measures. So it's not a national park, it's not a nature reserve, it's a new kind of thing. And it's starting to be applied across Canada, including on Department of National Defense sites that have a bunch of nature characteristics that you want to keep intact. So we identified this as a possibility and brought it forward to federal partners as well as provincial partners, because it would have to be recognized provincially to count as a protected area provincially and nationally. And so we're in regular contact with the federal contacts and the provincial contacts to see how it's coming through the system. It is going through the system somewhat slowly because it's a new can of worms for people to consider. But things are looking good from our contacts so far, so you could see it come forward as the first OECM in Nova Scotia in not too long. So things are very promising on that front.
Oh, that's very good news. Thank you. I appreciate hearing that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Karen R. and Karen M. for the excellent presentation. I'm just wondering if one of you could comment a little bit more about why you're requesting and recommending an independent report. What kinds of benefits do you think we could have, and maybe if you could say why you think we couldn't do something like this in-house, say with Parks and Recreation?
Sure. So I can speak to my perspective on that, coming again from a background in nature conservation planning. So I think it was really innovative at the time in the 1971 study I showed you, which I could circulate to councillors because it's amazing, that even at that time, that was HRM, or the version of it in 1971, that did want to think about parks from both a recreation and what they called natural asset perspective. And so they brought in Canadian Wildlife Service to help inform their thinking about where wildlife needs are. So zooming forward to now, I think an independent report would help bring that expertise and perspective for consideration at HRM. So I absolutely respect those in the planning group and those in the parks group who have come up through a park and planning perspective. But I think this independent report could bring other information and expertise as part of the decision making. So for example, HRM did this when planning for the Halifax Green Network. They brought in a company called O2 from Calgary who had expertise in map-based consultation and map-based conservation planning. So I think it would just, respectfully bring in expertise that's needed. And another piece of evidence about why we need that is the map that we showed you, which was used in 2015 and 2016 to take advantage of opportunities to acquire land to add to the park, which was done. Did have some rationale in the report, but the map was mostly created from a planning perspective and what could be achieved through looking at it through that lens. So we want to add to that and have a natural sciences, ecology-based map of where a conceptual park boundary could be, and then that is a good piece of information that HRM can use in its planning.
If I could just add, I wonder if we had evidence if we would also be eligible for federal conservation funds, if we could prove that it was for species at risk or valuable habitat.
Yeah, great to see that opportunity. There was already a sort of boatload of money called the Nature Fund available for the last 2.5 years. That amount of funding is about to run out. HRM accessed some of that to acquire land at Blue Mountain Birch Cove Lakes Regional Park. So the process is already familiar to HRM staff. So if you did have evidence that your acquisitions would help with federal targets, which are species at risk in rare ecosystems, you could maybe access that money again for acquisition. Yep, that's a good point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Not hearing any other questions. If colleagues, you don't mind, I do have a couple of questions. First of all, full disclosure, I have not been to Sandy Lake, but I now will make a note of definitely going there and taking a hike by all means. I want to offer, if I may, a little bit of advice, and this is simply my opinion. We've received numerous emails in support of Sandy Lake. However, the majority of them are in cut and paste. And I want to share with you both, Karens, that in my opinion, just sending us a cut and paste email has very little value. So I just leave that with you. I do read all emails that come in, but once they come in cut and paste, then paying attention to them is rather difficult. You mentioned about 1,800 additional acres and primarily owned by the federal government, provincial government, but did you say there is privately owned land also? And if that's the case, what percentage of 1,800 is privately owned?
Yeah, so there's about 22 properties, PIDs, in the 1,800 acres that is still wild. And so we've talked about the largest one. So that's 1 out of 22 if you're thinking ownership. So the majority of the number of parcels left are privately owned. Some larger chunks are owned by companies that have traditionally done housing development. So, and there is, from our understanding, active conversations from the Parks Group with landowners who might be interested in selling or donating land to become part of the park. But I don't know the percentage of the land that's privately owned. But most of the parcels are privately owned.
Okay. Thank you for that. And you know, your earlier slide about the three types of conditions of a lake, Councillor Austin and I will know too well about those lakes that have challenges, as we have Lake Micmac and Lake Manook with the last number of years, the blue-green algae issue. And so very familiar with those concerns. So I see no more questions. I want to thank both. Karen, thank you very much for your presentation today. And I bid you good luck in your future endeavors to protect Sandy Lake. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's go back to the presentation that we had up earlier. Madam Clerk, have we located Michael?
Yes, we have Michael in the meeting, so I will just ask producer to show his slides.
So Michael, if you would hit *6, that should unmute you from the phone. And are you with us, Michael? Sorry, could you speak again, Michael? You just broke up. Michael, are you with us?
Hi there, this is Michael.
There. Hey, Michael, welcome. My apologies, Michael. I didn't want to attempt your last name and mess it up. Could you pronounce your last name for us?
Sure, it's Zago. Thank you.
Zago, so the Zago. That's wonderful. Well, Michael, welcome to the Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee. We're happy to have you present to us on the welcome lot, and I'm very intrigued by the topic. So you have 10 minutes. The clerk will let us know when there's a minute left, and I'll just let you know when there's 1 minute left. But the floor is yours, Michael, and welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who's listening in, and thank you especially to Haruka for tracking me down from my miss of the start time. So here's me on Eastern time zone waiting for the 1 o'clock start. So thank you all. We're going to talk today about parking lots, which I'm assuming for an environment and sustainability group, this isn't a topic that comes up a lot. What I'd like to suggest is that parking lots are an incredibly well-distributed opportunity for green infrastructure, which can help Halifax achieve some of its many initiatives and goals related to climate, related to environment, related to quality of life and mobility. Next slide, please. I've been just reading and learning about the many initiatives that are underway in Halifax, whether it's, the climate action, the climate emergency declaration, the integrated mobility plan, and I'm sure this is just the tip of the iceberg. Next slide, please. But what I'd like to suggest to you is that parking lots are something that all municipalities are overlooking, in that they are incredibly antagonistic to all these goals and initiatives that are in place, in that they are part of the transportation network, but they are not serving the goals or needs of this transportation network. This is an overhead shot courtesy of Google Earth of the Sobeys Mill Cove. And what you see here is a very hostile environment to pedestrians, to people with special needs, to children, to active transportation users, to rainwater, to heat, and the buildup of heat island effects. So what I'd like to suggest to you is that we have missed collectively this incredibly important signal that we can send to the community, but also a functional piece of infrastructure that can do a much better job to help us achieve the goals that we've already set out and are trying to achieve. Next slide, please. Should be on slide 4 now. You've got many exciting goals, and they're admirable and they're ambitious. The parking lot design as they are designed today are not helping on the climate front, because they're encouraging single occupancy vehicle trips, which are carbon intensive. They're not really supporting natural systems of any kind other than a few trees here or there, which tend to die off. And they're hot, and they're going to get hotter. From a water perspective, obviously there's stormwater runoff, there's zero permeability typically. And sometimes, that just dumps it into the stormwater system, which causes flooding. And obviously all surface pollution is flushed into the system, the ecosystem typically. And then public safety and equity, we're really providing the protections to the most affluent, those who are driving, but we're not providing access and safety to pedestrians or active transportation users, and car movements are prioritized. Next slide, please. In the IMP, you outlined a complete streets hierarchy, which I think is fantastic. And what it does is it suggests that the needs of different users needs to be treated in priority order, that those who walk and cycle and e-scooter and take transit should be given priority. But if you look at a parking lot hierarchy, if someone were to sketch it out, really the lion's share is for those who drive. It's everything about the infrastructure in terms of putting more cars in the lot. And I noticed in your IMP that according to your own research, parking lots, there's a surplus of parking spots in parking lots in particular. Because I know parking is a hot button, but according to your research, there's a 40% vacancy rate in parking lots on an ongoing basis. So there is space that we're just not utilizing. Next slide should be slide 6. The good news is, what's great about parking lots is they're everywhere. And so we have this existing real estate footprint already, which is well dispersed, and it's relatively cost effective to start to improve the design and start to improve how we support all these other goals that we have. So these are just examples at retail, in schools, and community buildings, but this also applies to offices, private offices, malls, just about any possible building that you can think of. Look at how we've catered to the car here. And so no wonder our goals for active transportation trips aren't increasing. If you're on your bike and you ride to Shoppers Drug Mart and you get there in a protected bike infrastructure, but then you get to the parking lot and you're left to your own devices. There's no racks, there's no safe passage from the curb to the front of the building. So if you're like most people, you're like, I'll just drive. And so what we've lost is that active transportation trip. Next slide, please. I'd like to suggest to you that there's another way to think about this. And for lack of a better term, we're calling it the welcome lot. It's a parking lot that's designed to encourage active transportation, improve connectivity and safety. And these are just a few, illustrative images. You know, clearly we can learn a lot from what's happening in Europe, but we can do a lot here in North America. We can provide protected infrastructure for active transport users from the connected infrastructure that we're building on the streets, and we can provide adequate and convenient racks for storage, not around the corner, but at the front of the store to signal to everyone that we want you to ride or make your own way here in active transportation. We can put down permeable surfaces. There's a company that I've been working with called PurePave out of Ottawa. They have worked with the NRC to perfect a permeable pavement solution that allows stormwater to be delivered into the groundwater table rather than storm drains, and therefore enable us to support more greenery, more biodiversity on site. And then we could also obviously provide safety and equity, protect vulnerable users, and you know, not cater just to the automobile. Next slide, please. I'd like to suggest, and just so you know, the welcome lot is not this proprietary thing. It's not this existing patented technology. It's in a concept in search of a progressive municipality wanting to implement it here. That my belief is this is really aligned with everything you're trying to do already. But what we're going to do here is we're going to close and fix a broken node in the active transportation network. Any network needs to be complete to be functional. We think and believe that this will facilitate that mode choice that you want your residents to have and support them in those choices. Obviously, there's lots of benefits around stormwater runoff and local water quality. We're going to reduce car trips and emissions, which are all positive things, and support the urban tree canopy. There's lots of benefits. Hopefully, you know, these are apparent to you. Next slide, please, slide 9. There's financial benefits. Obviously, you're going to save money on flood mitigation, downstream climate mitigation, and you know, the green dividend from enhanced natural systems, and reduce safety incidents. If we could avoid one car pedestrian incident on a public building, in a public lot, obviously this is going to more than pay for itself. There's all kinds of environmental benefits. I think I've talked about them. Reducing car mode share, driving up active transportation share, and then, you know, spaces, physical spaces that are more enjoyable and more equitable and accessible for all. Next slide, please. Slide 10. I outline here a project team, not because by any means do I believe that it must be this project team, but what I wanted you to know that I have liaised with a number of organizations that are very capable. My goal would be to work with local suppliers for design, for construction. In fact, MJ Bemister Contracting is the Dartmouth-based PurePave installer, so he has a license to install PurePave locally. But the goal would be to assemble a local team, work with a local group to make this happen. Just a little bit about me on slide 9, so next slide. I'm an entrepreneur, have a couple of different companies. One is a consultancy, a marketing consultancy. The other is a climate consultancy. I come to this just as a concerned, interested citizen, not as a, you know, I'm not trying to build an empire here. I just want to see something like this happen so that other municipalities can move forward. I see the next steps. Last slide, slide 12, please. The desired outcome for me is a pilot to policy. So where we do an implementation that influences future infrastructure design policy, we pick some candidate sites, we talk to stakeholder groups, and funding is key. There's lots of funding around green infrastructure from the federal government. I'd like to select some sites and work with a local organization for project stewardship. That's it. Last slide is discussion and Q&A. Thank you again for the opportunity to join your meeting today.
Michael, thank you very much for your presentation. Truly appreciate it. Do we have questions for Michael?
Mr. Chair, it's Councillor Cleary.
Yes, Councillor, you wish to ask a question? The floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you, Michael, for the presentation. It's intriguing, and of course, as someone who walks and cycles most of the places they go, I regularly see just how inhospitable many parking lots are for active transportation users. In the advocacy and the work that you've done in other provinces, what kind of powers over private property when it comes to transportation planning do those provinces have, and have municipalities been able to mandate these kind of changes on private property? One of the issues when it comes to our land use planning and our charter is essentially, even if we had the authority to mandate these changes on private property, anything that's already there is grandfathered in as a legal non-conforming use. So it becomes, any change would be maybe incentive-based rather than rules-based. So what has been your experience working in other jurisdictions? Have other municipalities been able to mandate these kind of changes on these private parking lots?
Great question. Thank you, Councillor Cleary. And I can't say that I come to this as the foremost expert on, municipal policies and, the binding nature of the policy framework. So my apologies. I'm probably speaking more as a student of this than I am as an expert. The conversations I've had to date are, so far, there's lots of interest, but also, an acknowledgement of some of the challenges of making this happen. Definitely the public property seems to be much more, there seems to be a shorter path to success because of the ability to influence both the design, retrofit, maintenance of those properties. But I've also had very positive conversations with large developers and property owners who are very mindful of both their reputational as well as their disclosure obligations related to the environment and climate. So that doesn't mean they're all ready to send out the backhoes and start ripping up their parking lots, but their parking lots typically have a shelf life and they're on a renewal calendar. So as the pavement degrades, they need to do some resurfacing regardless. So what I found is there's some interest. It's, I would say, preliminary. I think the best case scenario is a progressive landowner who actually wants to invest in their community, who wants to see some of the outcomes that we're talking about, who wants to perhaps have some encouragement from the city or some acknowledgement of a joint type of initiative where they do receive perhaps some incentives. I can speak for the City of Toronto has some parking lot design policies in place which mandate the amount of greenery and green infrastructure, so like trees, plants, bushes, as well as the permeability of new sites. So they definitely also, as you mentioned, the grandfathering is a factor. In the case of new builds, green sites, there's actually a cost benefit of putting permeable pavement down because you actually can avoid the high cost of groundwater dispersion, sewer systems. So you can actually make an economic argument that this actually can make sense because you can avoid the extensive investments in stormwater infrastructure that is just frankly costly for the landowner. Does that help answer your question, Councillor Cleary?
It does, and we have some of those policies in place. So Halifax Water, for example, on commercial properties charges a differential rate depending on the amount of impervious surface that a property owner would have. So I'm intrigued by this, and I saw Councillor Mancini as our chair making some notes about some of the things you were saying. So I suspect we'll be investigating this both here at this committee and perhaps at our community planning and our other land use planning venues. So I appreciate that, Michael. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Cleary. Councillor Morris. Councillor Morris, you have a question? Maybe on mute, Councillor?
Yes, I'm sorry.
There you go.
Thanks, Michael, for the presentation. It's interesting to think about unpaving parking lots, I guess. If you were to find some candidate sites, what would be the first steps that you would recommend? What can be implemented the most quickly and simply?
Thank you, Councillor Morris. That's an excellent question. What I have actually been conducting in a couple of other municipalities, Toronto and Waterloo, is actually doing some Google Earth-based analysis. So typically, if there is a counselor or district lead who has a particular interest or is aware of some upcoming opportunities with the built environment, we can do some essentially Google Earth snooping around to look at different sites and assess their proximity to active transportation on-street networks, and assess them sort of more at a subjective level around like how much space is there, how much disruption might be required, and how easy would it be to begin a transformation. In terms of identifying sites, so in a couple of these municipalities, we've actually mapped entire districts, wards, all the possible sites, including public and private sites, prioritize them sort of a red, yellow, green, in an attempt to advance the conversation. And sometimes that prompts a conversation with, for example, a school board or a Parks and Recreation group or private landowners. So I think if I could answer your question most directly, Councillor Morris, for me, it's a combination of finding some champions who think this makes sense, can see some potential application, and then doing a bit of a deeper dive on the stock, if for lack of a better term, on a bit of an inventory on potential sites where the combination of local interest, owner interest, and suitability from a subjective assessment, which ultimately would lead to some sort of a more formal assessment and that could be done internally by the Halifax internal urban planning team around what would it take to do an implementation, because not every site, I don't believe, requires permeable pavement. So to me, there's kind of scales of implementation depending on the site and the ambition.
You're on mute there, Councillor. Sorry, you're on mute, Councillor.
Sorry, they're vacuuming here at home, so I'm just trying to keep the sound of the vacuum out of the meeting. Just if I could just follow up briefly. So are you saying that doing one parking lot on its own is not really worth doing, that you need to do an area or a group? Is that what I'm hearing?
No, to directly answer your question, all I meant was what I found success is where a councillor or a district lead is interested, that we can zero in on an area, but definitely not. I think, from my perspective, from a pilot to policy, we can start with one. But I also, if you can do two, sometimes I think that's a bit better because it eliminates any noise from the specifics of a particular site and circumstance. But absolutely not. I don't think you need to do this on a sort of district or broad geography. I think if we can drive active transportation trips to one retail or office or school, I think that's a win.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions for Michael? Seeing none, I do have a couple of questions. Michael, again, thank you for the presentation. Do you have any examples in Canada, North America, whether it's municipalities or businesses that have taken on the welcome lot approach?
Great question. I think in a holistic way, there is an example of a Honda motor company in Ontario that has built what is seen as very let's call it a progressive parking lot. But I think what you're more likely to see is aspects of it happening in bits and pieces. So the photo I showed of that separated cycle track is actually at a school, Leaside High School in Toronto, that just had a teacher who was really passionate about active transportation, and she pushed to have this done when they redid their parking lot. Honda has created this parking lot which essentially allows zero surface water to escape beyond, like it's sent into a filtration system so that by the time it's returned to the groundwater system, there's zero salts and pollution. But I'd be happy to share the case study of that particular lot. It's held up as one of the most, quote, green parking lots ever developed and built. And I'd be happy to share that with you as a follow-up.
Yeah, please do, Michael. I would like to see that. You mentioned had many conversations with the development community. You know, the concept you're sharing with us today, does it cost more to create these types of parking lots? Or if you're redoing a parking lot because it's extended its life, is it more expensive to do it this way or cheaper? I'm just trying to get a sense of, from the development community, you know, are they entertaining it? Are they welcoming the idea, or are flags of cost raised up the flagpole?
Great question. What I've found, my experience, so I can't speak for all, is that there is interest in the sustainability groups, a strong interest, because it aligns directly with the mandates that they've been giving around reducing emissions, reducing footprints, improving biodiversity. The truth of the matter is, as we go up the ladder to, say, the COO and the CFO or the heads of development, they are thinking a lot less, I guess, long term. You know, they are looking at the upfront costs with a much stricter criteria of evaluation. So they've kind of bumped into some resistance on the cost front. To answer your other question around cost, I think there's a couple of incremental costs that are being weighed here. Incremental cost number one is the physical surface. That PurePave, by the way, their website is purepave.ca, is more costly than asphalt. Asphalt, you know, is a petroleum-based product, lots of carbon in its production, and PurePave actually results in a third less carbon emissions during its production. And as I mentioned, it is a European technology that has been adapted for Canada and Canadian application, because there have been some other permeable pavement solutions that just didn't work in the Canadian climate.
Right.
So there is an incremental cost. It costs more than asphalt. There's no doubt about it. And there is more prep required to build the right base. So when you're doing a retrofit, it can be a hard economic argument to justify putting down PurePave to replace asphalt. So to get back to sort of the other barriers is, if I'm a developer and I'm taking away parking spots, am I affecting my commitments to provide adequate parking based on, you know, my development permission? So that is another factor, that we are actually asking for more physical space from their development site. I think this is my personal belief that there are developers and landowners out there that are more ecologically and socially minded, that understand that, you know, we can't achieve the goals that we all have without changing business as usual. And I do believe, and we have had conversations with more, you know, landowners that maybe have 2 or 3 sites instead of 20 or 30, that want to invest in their communities, that want to behave in ways that are consistent with their personal values, that have more discretion, frankly, to just say, this is the way I want to do things. So in the ideal world, we would find you know, a municipal champion and a commercial champion who really believes and sees the value of this, both from a community investment point of view, an ecological outcome, the safety of you know, people who are patronizing or visiting their sites. So I didn't mention that PurePave, because it's porous, ice does not accrete in the same way either. So in the winter, if it snows, snow can sometimes just melt right off it. There's a less snow accretion and less ice accretion. So there isn't an actual hard number to it, but that there is less maintenance and salt, sort of snow maintenance and salt requirements of a pure pave lot. So there is no kind of hard data to support that, but that is evidenced in the applications that have been put down.
Well, thank you for that, Michael. You know, as you're going through your presentation, I'm thinking of possible candidates, and you know, you look at on the commercial side, who are the biggest parking lots that we have in HRM? Well, they would be the Sobeys and the superstores and the car dealerships as candidates. And I think of HRM projects, and Councillor Austin, who's on the committee, you know, I think Councillor Austin Graham's Cove, that is going to have a new parking lot redone. I mean, what a great candidate. I think of in my district, Dartford Crossing, and proposed developments such as Port Wallace and Shannon Park. So finding those champions, it's interesting. So thank you, Michael. I see no more questions. We really appreciate you stepping up and sharing the information. I am intrigued by your presentation, and I think you'll be hearing from us again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So next on the agenda, let's see here. We're at number 11, information items brought forward. There are none. And we are at now 12 reports. We're in a presentation on Halifax, the annual progress report. So if you could bring up that presentation, and I believe we have Taylor Owen, Kevin Boutlier, and Shannon Miedema here. And I am looking forward to this presentation. Shannon, do you want to take the lead and again introduce your team?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the committee, my name is Shannon Miedema, and I manage the Energy and Environment team for the city. And we're here today to give a little bit of an update on what we've been doing since the Halifax Climate Plan was unanimously approved by Council in June of last year. And with me, I have Taylor Owen, a climate change specialist, and Kevin Boutlier, a clean energy specialist, who are going to co-present with me today. Next slide, please. Just before I pass it off to Taylor, you know, for the benefit of new councillors, I know a lot of councillors who are on another second or third term have heard us talk about this ad nauseum, but you know, we spent the better part of a year and a half developing a really comprehensive climate mitigation and adaptation plan in speaking with stakeholders, the general public, trying to really hear as many voices as possible in the community to come up with a strategy for meaningfully addressing climate change in the time and at the scale that we need to do it. And we had Sustainability Solutions Group do the climate modeling for us to show us really the pathway that we need to take on the mitigation side. And then we did some consultation and asked some questions around priorities for adaptation to try and figure out where to start putting our energy and resources on building community resilience, safeguarding our communities and our infrastructure. So Taylor's going to do the next part of the presentation. I'll pass it over to her. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. So like Shannon mentioned, this diagram really sets the basis for a lot of our mitigation actions that are in the plan. And you'll see that it shows our 2016 baseline year for greenhouse gas emissions. And then if you follow along the top, that is our business as usual case. So any of the programs and policies that we've already committed to kind of give us that 33% reduction over the next 30 years. And then underneath that red line is really where we need to be. So that's our steep emissions curve that's based on sticking with the 1.5 degree pathway that's outlined by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And all of these wedges that are here are the different actions that are outlined in the plan. So you'll see that the largest area of action is this red section here, and that's retrofitting of our existing buildings. And then followed by rooftop solar, implementing large-scale renewables, net zero new buildings, electrification of our transportation, and then other actions, which includes water and wastewater, our waste system, industrial processes. And what's really important to understand is that all of these actions really need to happen together. We can't really just pick and choose one or the other to implement that. They're really all important and all add up to that reduction of getting us as close as we can possibly get to net zero by 2050, which is the target that was approved in the plan. You'll also see that since the curve is so steep, the action really needs to start now, and a lot of the action needs to happen in the first 10 years of implementation. Next slide, please. So the plan is organized into 3 main categories of action: decarbonized and resilient infrastructure, prepared and connected communities, and governance and leadership. And there's 46 actions that fall into these 3 areas. Next slide, please. And although, like I mentioned, all of the actions are really important and need to happen together, when the plan was approved in June, there was also the direction to focus on these 7 critical core areas of action. And these are really prioritized based on the level of ambition that is needed in the plan and where we can see the most impact, as well as areas that we already had some things started and the municipality was really able to lead on. And so these areas include developing a retrofit and renewable energy programming, thinking about our municipal buildings and making sure that we're able to retrofit them and make them net zero and climate resilient. Electrification of transportation, both as a municipality as well as across the community, creating standards for our new buildings to be net zero, developing a framework for assessing and protecting critical infrastructure, building more capacity around climate adaptation, and developing a strategy to finance and operationalize the Halifax plan over the 30-year period. Next slide, please. So when the plan was approved in June, one of our first kind of big questions was what was the collaboration and governance model that we needed to be able to start on all of these really big actions. And this plan is not just a municipal plan, it's a community-wide plan. And so there were many stakeholders involved in the creation of the plan. And so how do we keep all of those people involved in the implementation of this work? And how do we work effectively across all of these organizations and meeting the timelines and the scale of ambition that's really needed for this type of plan to work? And so thinking about what are our common themes and agendas that we can work on together, how do we communicate effectively, how do we collaborate, and how do we share our successes and the data and measurement that's really needed to continue into implementation. Next slide, please. And so our first work really started on creating a governance structure that took place in August. And we took part in Complexity Summer School, which was run through Complexity University. And this provided an opportunity for a group of municipal staff, as well as some of our external stakeholders from the stakeholder group that put the plan together, to start working as a team and develop a foundation for which to build a Halifax stakeholder implementation model. And our learning really focused on a paradigm shift away from business as usual strategic planning, which usually focuses on kind of creating that 5-year plan of how do we start implementation, or a 3-phase plan on how to start some action, and really moved towards acknowledging the fundamental uncertainty and diversity of these complex systems that we're working in. And a team moved the Halifax objectives forward around prototypes. And so these are really concrete projects with clear emissions reduction targets or resilience targets, and designed to start small, be tested over time, be able to adapt as we need to, and then really scale up the things that are successful. And so during this time, we had a kind of practice prototype during the month of August. And we actually were able to implement an electric vehicle delivery pilot and provided some electric vehicles to some startups that were working as delivery services in the municipality. And this work was really taken on by the Innovation Outpost with the Halifax Partnership. And we're now trying to figure out how do we scale up the success of this, and and it's also led to a strengthened partnership with the Halifax Innovation Outpost, where they're now having a focus on climate change, and we're working to launch some more prototyping teams and determine the resources that we need to be able to support this innovative work. And the stakeholder team that has been involved throughout is also still meeting on a quarterly basis, and this provides an opportunity for us to share our stories, share our successes across all organizations, and those members are also going to be invited to join some prototyping teams as we dive further into action. So I'm now going to pass it off to Kevin Boutlier, and he will talk a little bit more about our retrofit prototyping team, as well as some other corporate and community climate action. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Taylor. The first prototyping initiative that's underway will focus on developing a deep energy retrofit program, as Taylor mentioned, and it is the most important action to achieving our climate goals. The Deep Energy Retrofit Program is going to be designed to achieve a 50% reduction in energy demand by 2040 for both residential and non-residential community buildings. So to do this, we have created a design team that is made up of municipal staff, nonprofits, and industry experts who we're aiming to build off the success and lessons learned through the Solar City program and work through the key barriers that currently face property owners when it comes to those deep energy retrofits. To support this team, we have applied for funding through the Provincial Low Carbon Community Fund, so that if we are successful, the funds will be used to provide training to the group and hire expert advisors when needed. And we've also submitted an application to find folks at the FCM, Community Efficiency Financing Program, so that we can conduct a study that would explore alternatives and equitable financing mechanisms for this new program. Funding decisions for both of those applications are expected shortly. However, we have begun holding weekly meetings with our design prototype team to develop the program that will focus not only on retrofits, but also on renewables, resiliency, and equity. So we're in the very early stages of that. Next slide, please. The 2016 emission baseline for the HRM found that about 19% of community-wide emissions comes from the transportation sector, with light-duty vehicles making up about 90% of that. So while the Halifax plan first recommends that we do get residents out of vehicles on the bus, active transportation, some of those people, it won't be feasible for them to do that, so they will still be in vehicles. So we need to ensure that those are decarbonized vehicles. So last spring, through a competitive process, we hired Dunsky Energy Consulting to develop a municipal electric vehicle strategy that would advance HRM in becoming an EV-ready city. So that strategy is expected to be complete by the end of the month, and we will be coming back to council, I would say later in the spring, with recommendations regarding community infrastructure needs, enabling policies, public education, and a roadmap for the full conversion of our light-duty fleet to electric by 2030. Next slide, please. So through the passing of Halifax in June, Council did show leadership by committing to a net zero municipal operations target by 2030, which includes our corporate building stock. So to accelerate the deep energy retrofits, we're continuing our very successful partnership with Efficiency Nova Scotia through their on-site energy manager program, and in close collaboration with the folks in corporate facility design and construction, we've made some major strides by already reducing annual energy and emission intensity within our corporate build by about 10 gigawatt hours and 6,500 tons of CO2. Some sample projects on the retrofit front include the Woodside Ferry Terminal renovation, which when complete will see a 75% reduction in energy consumption, and the relocation of the mechanical equipment to the upper levels for increased resiliency to the effects of sea level rise. Another notable project includes the Dartmouth North Community Center and Library, which is currently undergoing renovations, and we'll be aiming to achieve a full deep energy retrofit and the addition of about 75 kilowatts of solar electric to offset the energy within that building. When it comes to new construction, the federal government does plan to release a new tiered energy code later this year, which the final tier, tier 4 or 5, will be expected to be net zero ready compliant by 2030 for the community. However, corporately, we've already begun to design all new buildings to achieve this net zero standard. Two example projects include the Needham Park washroom facility, which I believe is going out to, it's been designed and is going out to tender within the next month or so, which will be completely net zero, and the Williamswood Fire Station, which is recently completed and will actually serve as an example for our aging fire stations as we build new fire stations going forward. And that building is seeing some very efficient equipment installed and about 50 kilowatts of solar on that roof. So while net zero buildings, they do come with a capital cost premium, there are several long-term benefits, including operational cost savings, resiliency, and the stimulation of a green workforce. So now I'm going to toss it over to Shannon to finish us off.
Thank you, Kevin. Next slide, please. So all along, we've talked about how the climate crisis is also an opportunity. It's an opportunity for collective action. It's an economic opportunity as well as a social opportunity. And we've made some really exciting steps on the economic side of things. Kevin was just kind of covering some of the high level stuff in terms of buildings, costs and savings. But, you know, in the early days of COVID, when we had been planning on starting our new 5-year economic growth strategy in collaboration with the Halifax Partnership, and then had to deal with COVID and all of its impacts, you know, it was decided early on that they would pause that process and instead work first on an economic response and recovery plan for our city. And we were able to collaborate with that team to ensure that the recovery plan included a principle of resiliency and aligned with the major objectives and targets of our climate plan. And so that was really exciting, and it started the beginning of a really great partnership that we now have with the Halifax Partnership on now that they are ready to do the next 5-year economic growth strategy, and they're contemplating it along 4 major themes, and one of them is a green economy theme, which we think is really fantastic. And a little while ago, the partnership hosted a CEO forum on the green economy that I understand was very well received. And then following that, the mayor held his first economic roundtable, which I think he's planning on doing for all 4 themes. And the first one was on the green economy. We were able to present on Halifax, and it was really incredible to see the enthusiasm and reactions from our business community in the city. So we think that this holds a lot of promise, and we're going to keep on partnering and working in this way. Next slide, please. Just a couple of key successes. I think we do go into a lot of detail in the update report that we provided to full council last month, but we have secured 3 new professionals for implementing the climate plan. We have 2 new clean energy specialists and a climate change specialist. So we have Chris Bernard and Bharathi Asaki-Mutu as clean energy specialists, and we have Samantha Page as a climate change specialist, and they began in November and December. So we've grown our team substantially to help resource all that needs to be done with this plan, and we're really excited, and we're preparing kind of further needs as we go forward. We regularly report through the Carbon Disclosure Project, CDP for cities. It's part of our commitment through the Global Covenant of Mayors, and we report on all of our greenhouse gas emissions and our plans for dealing with them, both corporately and at a community-wide scale. And this year we received our first A grade and are among the kind of top echelon of leading cities in Canada, North America, and actually the world because of our climate plan that we now have in force, and because of the work that we've done over the last number of years. So that's something to really celebrate. And then in terms of, you know, Kevin alluded to some of the building work with our on-site energy manager kind of contract that we have with Efficiency Nova Scotia. We've been accounting for all of the savings from the work that he does on our corporate buildings, and with an investment over the last, you know, 2.5 years of about $2 million, we are already seeing $1.3 million in savings every single year off of our operating and maintenance costs of the work that's been done in our buildings. And we've even heard from the managers in the buildings groups that they are noticing substantial savings in their operating budgets. year over year, which is really fantastic. On the adaptation side, I think you received a memo recently. It was made a little bit of news. We are part of a project being run by the Municipal Natural Assets Initiative to begin to inventory all of the natural assets that sit within the municipality, within our boundaries. And so that's an exciting piece of work that we're getting going on, hoping that we'll actually ultimately be able to include natural assets in our full corporate asset management program going forward. And we are finally done with the LiDAR acquisition, and we now have really detailed, updated, and larger digital elevation models and surface elevation models for the entire municipality. And that is made as open data for everybody to use. And we are now in a position to use this model to update all of the flood risk maps and to incorporate everything that's going to be coming down from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They're releasing their next 5-year update on climate impacts. They're targeting this spring. And so we'll get those numbers, work with the experts here locally on what projections to use within HRM, and we'll be updating those maps and sharing them as we go forward. Next slide, please. So in terms of next steps, we've been working away, refining the proposal that environment is a strategic priority area for council and everything that falls along with that. So really trying to get all of the environmental priorities in one place, thinking about all of the initiatives and where they fall over the 10-year planning horizon, and thinking about the strategic funding requirements in collaboration with finance on how to move all of this work forward. And we're also, this is a little bit of an update just because this is when we're going to be updating on how the plan implementation is going year over year. We want to have really a full year and then some time to collect all the numbers and then present to council kind of in the fall of every year to show how we're doing and where we might need more resources or assistance, or to celebrate our successes that will align with budget conversations to be able to have that timing line up. So the report that we gave, the interim update report, isn't what the annual reports are going to look like. We're spending a lot of time now trying to come up with our key performance indicators, what kind of quantitative and qualitative metrics do we want to regularly report on. So we're thinking a lot about that and about more efficient ways of actually pulling that data across our stakeholders, because it's not just data that lives in our shop or within the municipal government itself. So we're working away on that. And then, as Taylor mentioned, lots going on with our action network or our stakeholder group, trying to train them up on the complexity university training that we had and get them really committed to some of the action teams for the critical first pieces of work we're doing. We're continuing to think about mainstreaming climate thinking across the organization now that we have the ecological lens motion that was approved, on working with staff to train them on how to treat that environmental implications section that's in every recommendation report. We're engaging with human resources now to figure out how to develop that training program. And we are working with the Outpost and with Government Relations and External Affairs on developing an engagement and outreach strategy for the public at large on Halifax. So I think we'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Well, Shannon, Taylor, and Kevin, thank you very much for that presentation and that update. Do we have questions for the team? Councillor Austin? Oh, sorry. Yeah, Councillor. No, I see Councillor Morris first, please, and then Councillor Austin. Catherine, you have the floor.
Okay. I thought Pam was ahead of me, but
Oh, maybe so, Pam. It's hard to keep track. She is. If I may go to Pam first, thank you. We're also polite here in Canada. It's wonderful. Councillor Lovelace, you first, then Catherine, and then Sam.
Just have a really quick question, Shannon. Thank you so much to all of you for this great presentation. I'm really excited to see the shift at HRM in regards to this, very important strategic priority of environment. I'm curious to know what the ETA is for the delivery of the consultation of the public engagement program. I'm interested to see what that looks like compared to what we've done in the past, and just wondering if you have a sense of when we're going to get a sneak peek.
Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor, I don't know if you mean, like, we did a whole bunch of public engagement in developing the plan, which was great, and the message we received loud and clear was, thank goodness you're doing this. Someone needs to lead it. We're glad it's you, city. Get going. You should have started yesterday. But it was a very different. It was very different than when we'd consulted the larger public several years prior on updating our community energy plan. So that was really validating, and we did some specific work around interest in doing certain things with their homes and with vehicles and things like that, and then where they saw our vulnerabilities in terms of climate risk. In terms of our next steps in developing a public engagement and outreach strategy, that involves really trying to keep the momentum going with Halifax and continue to educate and continue to bring people into the tent to really encourage them to participate where it makes sense for them with Halifax, to consider climate in the work they do in their daily lives. Like, it's really this ongoing and building kind of initiative. And so we have someone on contract through the Innovation Outpost to really help us think differently and more creatively around how to really get people's attention and keep it. So we're looking at social media options, video, hosting certain events, all kinds of things in that way. And but we haven't even scratched the surface on actually starting to draft what that strategy looks like. We just are kind of we just secured that contract and had an initial meeting. So hopefully we'll have more to speak about in the very near future, because we are moving very quickly.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Morris, you have the floor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Shannon and team. It's so impressive what you're doing. It's very innovative and also very. I know you're trying to do everything in a practical way as well, and I think that being innovative and practical at the same time is quite a challenge. I just wondered if you could comment a little bit more on the eco lens. I'm interested in how this is going to be introduced to staff, especially who may not have any background in biology or environment. How, if you could just say a little bit about how you think the eco lens could be done across HRM.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. There is a report, I'm not sure if you've had a chance to look at it yet, where it had been a former motion to say, we don't really think the environmental implications section is giving us what we're looking for as council, because we want to have the information we need that's environmental, economic, and social to be able to be in the best position to make the best decisions. And so that's really where that came from. And we layered in kind of the climate piece as part of that overarching environmental considerations section. And so I think a lot of it is awareness raising. And so having mandatory online training for staff that are, it's not maybe every single person that works for HRM, but a lot of staff work on projects and policies and programs that turn into recommendation reports that go in front of committees and council. And so it's because a lot of what was happening, it was a really great idea many years ago, but a lot of what was happening was it kind of got noticed at the end of a process where, they got to the point of writing the report and filling up the sections, and it's like, oh, what do I do on the environmental section here? And, over time, we've built connections across business units where people would know to reach out and we could help them. We could help crunch some numbers on greenhouse gas reductions, or we could give them some things to think about. But we were always kind of coming in at the end of the process. So our aim and our objective is to actually have them think about it at the start and all throughout every project process where it makes sense, and to be able to be supportive of that through their work. So it's not necessarily that they all need to be experts in wetlands or climate change, but they need to know that there's probably a relationship between the work they're doing and the environmental considerations, and then we need to figure out how to get the answers we need so that we can do the best work.
Great, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Shannon and the whole team there. So I just jotted down a couple things as we're going through the presentation. Net zero on our buildings. I mean, that's fantastic that we're moving as quickly as we are on that. I mean, good for the pocketbook, and that is one of the things in climate change that we directly control. You know, we build our buildings. This is entirely within our own operation. I'm curious. What's the uptake like out there among the basically among our capital planners, our facilities people, our John McPhersons? Because I know that they're often under pressure with a limited budget to try and crunch things to get a building built. And you know, how do we manage that kind of organizational challenge of, on the one hand, they're trying to squeeze the capital dollar as much as they can to get as much into the new building facility as they possibly can, while also while not pitting that against the more expensive upfront but absolutely necessary long-term infrastructure that's needed on climate change.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillors. So John McPherson's group has been fantastic. We've been collaborating with them even before the climate plan had passed through council. With our on-site energy manager, what we're able to do is work with the corporate facilities and design group to identify where rebates from Efficiency Nova Scotia can offset that additional cost premium for those buildings, so that we can take it a step further. And also with our climate change account from last year, we were able to actually top that up as well. So for instance, they would build to their typical standards and would say, hey, let's put some solar on that roof, and we'll offset that cost. And so it's still a learning curve for both groups. However, I do want to mention the Williamsville Fire Station. When it went out to tender, we had put in energy efficiency equipment and solar on the roof, and it actually came back within budget. So it's really, you know, we're learning as we go, but seeing that it is actually quite feasible with the tools that we currently have.
Awesome. We have a new building, and you know, it's funny, one meeting, two references to it. There's a new building coming in Grahams Grove, so there might be opportunities there, because that's a brand new build, washroom, meeting space, nonprofit space. The offsetting, I mean, our buildings will still have some energy needs, and so one of the things it's going to be no surprise to Shannon, I'm going to ask about the potential power buy through green procurement, because I mean, we will still have some energy use at our facilities. I don't expect something like City Hall is ever going to be completely net zero on its own, so you need to have something somewhere else to offset that. And so I really very keen on the potential through the recent changes in the I think it's the Electric Act, whatever it is that the province has brought forward to potentially allow for green procurement. I'm wondering where we might be on that, if there's any sort of update that can be shared.
Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor, yes, we're really excited about the Green Choice program, and there was an announcement just before the holidays that the province had secured the consultant that's going to do the tendering process for a large wind development. And we've had some early conversations with the province and the federal government on whether HRM would be interested in participating in the purchase of some of that wind. So that's still on our radar and needs to work its way through the system. And, you know, they're still very early days, but it does hold a lot of promise. And we recognize that that's something that needs to happen. It's in the wedge model that we're going to buy green energy and we're going to make green energy, right? And that all has to happen to even get us towards that bit that needs offsetting at the end of the day. And also we're trying to look at the municipal operations 2030 target of net zero by 2030 pretty holistically. So it's not just our buildings, it's also the energy used in Halifax water, it's our waste, it's our lighting, and trying to not have a rigid plan because things are going to change a lot over time, and we want to be able to take advantage of opportunities like being able to purchase wind, especially, and to be able to figure out what makes the most financial and economic sense at any given time. But we're planning on coming up with a little bit of an umbrella framework for that net zero municipal target so that we can kind of track as we go and pivot where we need to on that.
Okay. I had two more, Mr. Chair. Do you want me to come back after Catherine gets a second chance?
If you wouldn't mind, Sam, that'd be great. Thank you.
That's fine.
Councillor Morris.
Thank you. I'll keep it short. I just wondered if there is a priority list for the buildings that would be converted to net zero, municipal buildings. How do we know which ones to target first?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, our on-site energy manager has recently put in the 83 largest energy consumers of our buildings into portfolio manager. I believe we're working at making that public, but those will be the candidates that we will start with and align them with the natural recapitalization of those buildings. So that's what we'll be looking at.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Austin, you have the floor again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the last two I had was how are we always the different, probably the most challenging one in the batch in some ways. How are we doing with the lobbying efforts with the province? Because so much of Halifax it requires things that are beyond our control, such as changing the building code, for example. Where are we at in terms of like actually getting that provincial attention, or trying? I know it's always the most challenging thing, it feels like.
Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor. Yes, we're working with the province closely across a whole bunch of different, policy pieces and questions and actions within the climate plan. There's a lot of good news there. They are developing their climate plan. They have the same 2050 target as we do baked into their legislation. And, I think they recognize the timeline, and I think they are under pressure to try and come up with the regulations and the climate plan this calendar year. And they've been good at reaching out to us, and they want to know what the biggest and most important things are that they could consider as part of their climate plan that would help achieve the goals of Halifax, understanding that, HRM is probably 50% of all of the emissions of the province, so it's pretty important. And we've talked a lot about being happy and willing leaders in a lot of this, because we're going to do it anyway. We have our marching orders, and we don't need to hold it tight necessarily to the city. Maybe there are some things that could ultimately spin up and be province-wide, like something like incentivizing retrofit. So we've got really great connections. Some of them went through the Gigaton training in August. We had someone from Department of Environment and someone from Department of Energy, and we're going to be offering another couple of teams of training in April, and so we're reaching out to them to see if we can get some others through the program with us. And also through the Outpost, the province has an innovation lab right beside the City Innovation Lab in the Maritime Center, and we're exploring, what it could look like to maybe collaborate with them in the Outpost work that we're doing on some of this quick, urgent action that we need. So the work is just continuing. Yeah.
Thank you. And so just last one, it's more of a comment, I suppose, in some ways. I'm assuming that you guys will show up to us again in budget deliberations when the planning department comes forward, because I am very keen on the what the resourcing plan is to make sure that we have the people inside HRM to actually do the work.
Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor, yes, we're deep into those conversations on both capital and operating, strategic funding, and be interested to see how it all goes forward this year.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Seeing no other questions, I have a couple of Sam's actually asked some of my questions. The budget one was the first one. I mean, you talked about, Shannon, that you have 3 new team members as part of your team, which is fantastic. But, you know, we are in the middle of budget right now as we speak. You know, what's in that budget that's being put in front of us right now that's critical for your success to move forward, that you need the approval for?
Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Chair and Council. I think that a lot of what needs to happen to implement the climate plan is around the strategic funding piece that went to budget committee that Jane Fraser is leading. You know, kind of saying how we have some very large city building initiatives that are important, that council has determined are important, that really live outside of kind of the business as usual capital and operating processes and envelope of the city. And so I think they've committed, I was watching budget committee when that conversation happened last week or whenever it was, and I think their plan is to work really quite hard and come back in, I think it's June, to have a bit of a plan, because that motion was approved, to have some options to really help with that strategic funding. And we're also looking at a lot of different options for leveraging the funds that we do have through all of the money that's coming down from the federal government and with the provincial government, and also some other really interesting finance options. A lot of financial institutions are starting to be very interested in the climate crisis, Canada Infrastructure Bank, and then there's these so there's a whole lot going on. We want to make our dollars count, and we want to do it in a really responsible way. So I think that's where a lot of that lives. And then, you know, in terms of the planning and development budget, that there's going to be some resources that are going to be, you know, put through likely, and we have some capital accounts as well, keep things going in the interim. But I think it's really that strategic initiative and strategic funding piece that's going to be really important.
Yeah, and that's really important to understand that, and thank you for that. You know, I heard from Kevin's part of the presentation about probably number one as we move forward, action is doing that deep retrofitting of our buildings. However, I've had conversations with people who said, well, HRM is such a small piece of the climate change, especially if the province really hasn't, even though one of my questions that Sam already asked is about where we are in the province and what are they doing, and we really haven't, and these are my words, haven't seen them step up like we've stepped up as of yet. I know those conversations are going on, but I've had conversations with people saying, so what if we even accomplish our goals of net zero? HRM is so small in the big picture. I mean, so why is it still important that that is our one of our number one goals?
Mr. Chair, I would say it's to show leadership. It's a responsibility to our residents. And I mean, the outcomes are positive. It's almost win-win, where there might be a higher capital investment, but we're actually saving taxpayer dollars over time with a lot of this work. So it's really about finding the money in the best ways now to then reap the rewards later. And especially when we look at the adaptation, that's just on mitigation. But when we look at the adaptation side, about protecting our communities, protecting our infrastructure, weathering storms and rebounding from storms as quickly as we can, you know, that's all I think priority for the city.
The last thing that and more of a comment, you know, I do look forward to when we become an EV city, Kevin, for sure. 2030 is so far off, but yet it's not that far away. I wish we could be there today. You know, and talking about our projects, Sam alluded to the new build in his area. I'm so excited to hear about the Dartmouth Library refit. I was there visiting the site the other day, and we have more projects like that. And so that is very, very exciting. So those are my questions. Thank you to your team, Shannon and Kevin. Taylor, this is your first time presenting to this committee?
It is, yes. Thanks for having us.
Our pleasure. We're the most friendly and the best committee of all committees, HRM. Thank you for all the work that you do. We're very excited. I love the fact that we are considered now the leaders, and we need to continue to be the leader. It'd be interesting with the province. There's a leadership campaign going on right now. On Saturday, they're going to be voting in a new leader, which will also be the premier. And I have my favorite because I know who really embraces what we're talking about here. So I look forward to that, see who's going to come out of that leadership, and hopefully that'll help us as we move forward. So thank you very much. Well done, team. Really, really appreciate it. All the best. Take the rest of the afternoon off. So thank you so much. All right, folks, let's move along with our agenda. What a great day. So next item on the agenda, 12.2 members of standing committee. There's none. Boards and committees, there are none. So we have one motion, which is my motion. If colleagues, if you don't mind allowing me to put that motion on the floor. It's with regard to the Regional Watershed Advisory Board review of water quality monitoring policy and program development report prepared by AECOM. So I'd like to put the following motion on the floor. It is recommended that the Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee refer the AECOM report to the Regional Watersheds Advisory Board to review and provide input to staff as they develop recommendations for the Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee based on this report. So moved.
Second, Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Councillor, for that. And I'm wondering, Shannon, if I suspect you're still on, if you wouldn't mind coming back to answer a couple of questions. So I want everybody to understand, you know, why this is the next step. So I know many of us, and Sam and I in particular, were very eager to see the report come forward. We have our lakes throughout HRM, particularly in Dartmouth. What's the action you're looking for? What's the turnaround time? You know, because here we are moving into the springtime very soon, and so it's such an issue in all of our lakes, but particularly Dartmouth. You know, what's the timing of getting that committee to do the work?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, the intention is to allow the Regional Watershed Advisory Board an opportunity to comment on the consultant's report to assist staff with the recommendation report that's going to go forward to the Environment Committee, and we're targeting May for that report. So the timing kind of work, you know, we did have a little bit of a resource issue when our water resource specialist went on temporary leave, and you know, we now have a new person in that role. We have Emma Waddy, and I believe she's listening in, and she came from the Atlantic Water Network and has now gone through the full consultant's report, recommendation report. Like, we have a draft recommendation report, but we had a few things to sort out, and we really want, and you know, RWAB hadn't been meeting for many months because of COVID, and we wanted to really give them an opportunity. That's kind of their reason for being, is to be able to comment on really important strategic work like this. If we are going to go for a long-term monitoring program of a whole series of lakes, that is what council desires in the end. And so we just really want to get it right, because it is such a significant commitment over time, and we really want to allow that group of experts to give us their feedback. And so because they're meeting next week and we're finalizing anyways, we thought it was a really good chance for them to see the report and tell us their thoughts.
Great, thank you, Shannon. Councillor Cleary? Go ahead, Sean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Miedema. So it's related to this, but only tangentially, so I'm going to disclose that right up front. And I support Councillor Mancini's motion to have RWAB, or the Regional Watersheds Advisory Board, look at this. Just recently, we updated their terms of reference to also look at joint projects with Halifax Water as an example. But if you look at their terms of reference in total, the Watersheds Advisory Board can look at things related to our regional plan and our secondary plans. So a question I have for you, because it's not often, and in fact, I can only count on one hand the number of times the Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee since I've been here has referred anything to RWAB. And typically their work plan is done by yourself, our staff, with them in terms of what they're going to be looking at. So I'm glad to see them being utilized for this. But my question is, what else can they be utilized for? I'll give you an example. Let's say that there is an application for a rezoning or a secondary plan amendment. Could the Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee, if this was in an important watershed, refer an application like that, because it would fall under a secondary planning strategy? Would the Environment Committee be able to refer to RWAB an application for development for rezoning as an example?
I see.
I believe that's
Kelly
a question
Detty.
for Josh.
Josh or Kelly Detty. I see Kelly.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. With respect to that question, the RWAB terms of reference were revised some years ago. I want to say, I think it was following the 2012 election and reordering of the districts, and terms of reference for various committees had changed at the time. And so RWAB is involved in planning applications only so far as municipal planning strategies direct that they be involved. For example, I think there's a specific policy in Bedford that requires that applications go through them, but they no longer have any role in planning applications. Those are dealt with at the staff level. So there's no role for RWAB to look at those, and mainly because a lot of the recommendations relative to development practices were incorporated into land use bylaws and planning policies at the time of the adoption of the regional plan.
So if I could just follow up on that. So, but the terms of reference currently do say that as required under those rules. So maybe they're not required to look at them, but is there an explicit, I guess, admonition or fence or parameter that says you cannot look at those things? So for example, the terms of reference also say that this committee can assign any project or refer any project. So it may not be something that is required, but could this committee say, you know what, this watershed is important and this application could have an impact and we would want to refer that to the Regional Watersheds Advisory Board? Is that something that could be done? I'm not saying it's recommended to be done or required, but could it be done?
We'd have to go back and look at the exact wording of the terms of reference in more detail. I haven't looked at them in a while, but the idea was very deliberate at the time. And I think what I can do is probably share with you the staff report that would have provided the background to the change in the terms of reference. But the idea being that they would provide input into policy as opposed to kind of routine applications. That was
awesome.
The note.
Appreciate that.
Okay.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further questions, we can have a call for the question on this motion, please.
Question.
Question's been called for. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you very much. We do have an in-camera item, but if someone would like to see if we can take care of that outside of in-camera. Actually, it's just approval of minutes, so.
Mr. Chair, it's Councillor Cleary. It's just minutes, so I'd be happy to move that the in-camera, in-private minutes of December 7th, 2020 be approved as circulated.
The seconder?
I'll second that, Councillor Austin.
Okay, Councillor Austin, second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye.
That's been approved. Thank you. I don't think there's any added items. Any notice of motions? The next meeting is March 4th. So, colleagues, what we saw today looks like what we're going to see for the next 2 or 3 meetings. We'll have 2 or 3 presentations. I believe the presentations for myself personally today were very informative, very worthwhile, and hopefully we'll see some action follow up from these presentations. So if we can have someone move forward in adjournment.
Adjourn. Councillor
Thank you.
Lovelace.
Thank you, Councillor Lovelace. Thank you very much. Thank you, staff. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Be safe, be green.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Take care.
everyone.
Thank you.